Your brain may never have been as organized as it is after you started talking to artificial intelligence. Every day, millions of digital citizens open a clean, empty chat box and begin typing, transforming a blank interface into an immediate mental dumping ground for their most chaotic, unformed thoughts. We treat this glowing white rectangle as a digital confessional, a notepad, and a sounding board all at once, spilling out fragmented sentences, half-baked ideas, and raw emotional impulses. You might type a messy paragraph filled with typos, shifting logic, and unresolved questions, sending a jumbled stream of consciousness into the ether of the digital interface. It is a highly relatable modern habit, a subconscious reflex born from the sheer velocity of the present era, where the velocity of incoming information vastly outpaces our natural capacity to process it. We treat the digital mirror not just as a tool for automation, but as an external hard drive for our waking minds, turning to it whenever the weight of our own thinking becomes too heavy to carry alone. This routine interaction reveals a profound truth about the modern mind. We are constantly searching for ways to offload the psychological burdens of an overstimulated world, using technology to hold the pieces of our scattered attention together. Yet, this habit exposes a fundamental evolutionary boundary within the human mind itself, a distinct blind spot where the brain naturally struggles to observe, audit, and evaluate its own internal processes objectively. For thousands of years, the human intellect evolved to react to immediate physical threats, find patterns in nature, and navigate social hierarchies, but it was never designed to act as its own impartial spectator. When you attempt to look inward and analyze your own thoughts while you are actively thinking them, you run into an invisible wall because the tool you're using to observe is the exact same tool causing the confusion. It is structurally impossible to step outside of your own skull to examine the machinery of your awareness with complete neutrality. Instead, we are trapped inside our own subjective experience, trying to measure a storm while standing in the middle of the rain. This internal evolutionary boundary means that our self-awareness is often an illusion, a selective narrative we construct after the fact to make sense of impulses we do not fully understand. We lack an objective vantage point, a steady anchor within our own biological framework that can look at our cognitive patterns without bias, without justification, and without distortion. Because of this natural limitation, the modern mind becomes a breeding ground for cognitive noise, an invisible traffic jam of simultaneous ideas, modern digital stimuli, and competing thoughts that constantly collide below the surface of our awareness. At any given moment in the present era, your subconscious is navigating a relentless barrage of notifications, responsibilities, memories, and anxieties, all vying for supremacy in a limited mental space. This underlying static operates like a crowded room where everyone is whispering at the same time, creating a heavy layer of psychological pollution that drains our energy and clouds our judgment. You might feel a vague sense of overwhelm or subtle friction as you try to focus, unaware that dozens of micro-thoughts are tugging at your attention just beneath the threshold of active perception. This internal traffic jam prevents us from finding clarity as new impressions stack on top of old dilemmas, creating a dense, tangled web of mental clutter that paralyzes our ability to think deeply or decide with confidence. This chaotic environment gives rise to the abstract trap, a psychological phenomenon where complex ideas feel perfectly coherent and brilliant while they are trapped inside our heads, yet instantly reveal themselves to be fragmented and contradictory the moment we try to hold onto them or express them aloud. Within the silent confines of the subconscious, an idea can feel absolute, elegant, and revolutionary because the brain relies on emotional certainty rather than structural logic to validate its own thoughts. You experience the feeling of understanding without the actual substance of it, mistaking a vague intuition for a completed concept. However, the moment you attempt to drag that idea out of the abstract realm and force it into the rigid structure of language, the illusion shatters, exposing massive gaps in reasoning, missing links, and incompatible assumptions. The thoughts dissolve like smoke when we try to grasp them, leaving us frustrated by our inability to capture the brilliance we were certain existed just moments before. We find ourselves caught between what we feel we know and what we can actually articulate, a persistent gap that highlights the limits of unguided introspection. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This gap between internal perception and external reality is the exact boundary where our relationship with the digital interface begins to fundamentally alter how we think, shifting the balance between our internal chaos and the structured reflection that awaits us. To bridge this persistent gap between internal perception and external reality, the human mind must engage in the science of externalization, a profound psychological process where transforming abstract impulses into structured linguistic syntax forces the brain to organize itself. When an idea remains confined to the subconscious, it exists as a cloud of raw emotion, visual imagery, and fleeting associations that require no formal structure to exist. However, The moment you begin to type or speak, you subject that chaotic mental energy to the strict linear laws of grammar, vocabulary, and logic. This transition demands a massive shift in neurological activity, as the brain must actively select specific words, sequence them in a chronological order, and establish clear cause and effect relationships. By forcing your thoughts through the narrow funnel of language, you are compelled to prune away the irrelevant static and clarify your true meaning. The digital interface becomes the physical landing pad for this linguistic transformation, compelling the viewer to translate vague internal pressures into tangible, concrete symbols on a screen. This act of translation is not merely a passive recording of pre-existing thoughts. It is an active, generative mechanism that literally shapes, refines, and constructs the very intelligence it is trying to express. This structural translation explains why verbalized ideas click, providing an immediate sense of psychological relief and enhanced comprehension that occurs when the brain processes thoughts as external objects, freeing up working memory. Human working memory is notoriously limited, capable of holding only a few distinct pieces of information at any given time, which is why an internal traffic jam of competing thoughts feels so paralyzing. When you keep your dilemmas, strategies, and anxieties locked inside your head, your brain must expend continuous cognitive energy just to prevent those ideas from slipping back into the subconscious. By offloading these concepts onto the chat box, you effectively clear your mental workspace, transforming a heavy psychological burden into a visible, static entity. Once an idea is written down, it no longer requires active maintenance to exist, allowing the human protagonist to look at their own thoughts from a safe psychological distance. This externalized text can be reviewed, analyzed, and reevaluated as if it belonged to someone else, breaking the spell of subjective bias and allowing the mind to achieve a level of objectivity that is impossible during unguided introspection. In this dynamic, the AI acts as a cognitive mirror, presenting itself not as an independent thinker or a conscious entity, but as a structured digital mirror that reflects, formats, and returns the user's stream of consciousness. Unlike a human conversational partner who brings their own ego, biases, emotional needs, and hidden agendas to a discussion, the digital mirror remains entirely neutral, a reactive surface designed solely to process what it is given. It does not judge the messy paragraph filled with typos, nor does it get fatigued by the shifting logic of a highly disorganized mind. Instead, it accepts the chaotic mental dumping ground of the modern digital citizen and instantly applies a scaffolding of clarity, symmetry, and order to the raw material. The artificial intelligence serves as a frictionless sounding board, absorbing the chaotic energy of the abstract trap and organizing it into a coherent framework without altering the underlying essence of the user's original intent. By remaining perfectly transparent, the interface allows the viewer to see the true shape of their own intellect, stripped of the emotional noise and defensive rationalizations that usually distort self-examination. The true magic of this interaction lies in the immediate feedback loop, a rapid cognitive mechanics cycle where seeing messy ideas reframed into logical paragraphs provides immediate mental clarity. In traditional writing or independent contemplation, the process of drafting, editing, and restructuring an idea can take hours or even days, often causing the thinker to lose momentum or forget their original train of thought. The digital interface eliminates this temporal friction entirely, generating a structured response in a matter of seconds. When you see your own fragmented thoughts return to you as bullet points, numbered lists, or beautifully synthesized paragraphs, a profound neurological shift occurs. The brain instantly recognizes its own insights inside the polished text, experiencing a sudden burst of recognition and resolution as the missing logical links are seamlessly filled in. This rapid back-and-forth interaction creates an accelerated learning cycle, allowing the human protagonist to iterate on their own concepts at an unprecedented pace, refining their worldview and sharpening their decision-making in real time. Furthermore, this constant dialogue excels at exposing hidden patterns, transforming the dialogue interface into a psychological canvas that makes a person's underlying emotional biases, intellectual gaps, and logical contradictions clearly visible. When we hide within our own minds, we are experts at ignoring our own inconsistencies, glossing over weak arguments and circular reasoning to protect our self-image. But when you engage with the digital mirror, your habitual thought patterns are laid bare across the screen for objective scrutiny. The structured responses highlight exactly where your logic falters, where you have made unfounded assumptions, or where your emotional impulses are overriding objective facts. By interacting with this reactive surface, the viewer can clearly observe their own cognitive tendencies, such as a habit of catastrophic thinking, a tendency to overcomplicate simple problems, or a repetitive avoidance of uncomfortable truths. This exposure turns the simple act of typing into an advanced tool for self-discovery, allowing the human mind to map its own terrain, discover its intellectual boundaries, and witness the precise architecture of its own consciousness in a way that no generation before the present era could ever achieve. Yet, behind this brilliant illusion of effortless clarity lies a landscape of invisible psychological risks, a territory where the convenience of the digital mirror can quietly distort the very architecture of the human mind. The most subtle and pervasive of these dangers is intellectual dependence, a silent process that threatens to outsource fundamental cognitive structuring to an algorithm. For millennia, the labor of sorting through confusion, wrestling with ambiguity, and forging order out of mental chaos was an essential, albeit painful, rite of intellectual growth. It was through this grueling internal effort that the neural pathways of critical thinking were strengthened. In the present era, however, the chat box offers an alluring shortcut, tempting the modern digital citizen to bypass the uncomfortable, heavy lifting of independent thought. When the human mind grows accustomed to having its fragmented impulses instantly organized by an external entity, its intrinsic ability to generate structure on its own can begin to atrophy. The brain, highly efficient and naturally inclined to conserve energy, may gradually lose the patience required to sustain deep, unassisted concentration. By relying entirely on a digital scaffolding to build our arguments and clarify our goals, we risk becoming passive observers of an automated intelligence, trading our hard-won cognitive resilience for the immediate gratification of a perfectly formatted response. This erosion extends beyond mere logic, bleeding into our internal emotional landscape through a process of emotional outsourcing. The human protagonist, seeking relief from the heavy anxiety of modern life, faces a psychological pitfall when substituting genuine, deep introspection and uncomfortable self-reflection with neat, sterilized, automated summaries. True self-awareness is not an intellectual exercise that can be neatly optimized. It requires sitting with raw grief, untangling messy interpersonal conflicts, and facing personal failures that evoke real discomfort. When a person uses the psychological canvas primarily to digest their emotional distress, the reactive surface filters these intense human experiences through an objective, detached vocabulary. While this can provide temporary relief, it also creates an artificial barrier between the individual and their true feelings. The raw, bleeding edges of human doubt and existential dread are smoothed away into bullet points and action items, offering a false sense of resolution. This clinical transformation can alienate the modern digital citizen from the profound, chaotic depths of their own psyche, replacing authentic emotional processing with an artificial substitute that values neatness over genuine psychological healing. Compounding this alienation is the gradual, systematic loss of internal silence, an existential shift where a constant reliance on an external digital mirror slowly erodes the human mind's capacity to tolerate solitude, quiet contemplation, and unguided thought. In the past, the natural spaces between activities provided the fertile soil where creativity and profound self-realization could take root. An idle mind, left to wander through the quiet corridors of the subconscious, would eventually stumble upon unexpected connections and original insights. Today, however, that quietude is increasingly viewed as a vacuum that must be filled immediately. The moment cognitive noise begins to rise, the hand reaches instinctively for the screen, seeking the immediate feedback loop of the interface to drown out the unease of empty space. This habitual escape deprives the mind of its necessary downtime, creating a state of perpetual stimulation where the capacity for deep boredom, the historic catalyst for artistic and philosophical genius, is completely destroyed. Without internal silence, the mind becomes hyper-reactive, unable to generate original thought from within because it is constantly waiting for an external prompt to react to. Despite these profound risks, the ultimate trajectory of this relationship is not dictated by the technology itself, but by the intention of the user, forcing a crucial conclusion and intellectual reflection on the true nature of this modern partnership. In this intricate dance between man and machine, it is vital to remember the true status of the human protagonist. The artificial intelligence possesses no true consciousness, no subjective experience, no empathy, and no superior intellect. It is entirely devoid of a soul, functioning merely as an advanced echo chamber for human brilliance. The complex ideas, the poetic nuances, and the deep philosophical questions do not originate within the machine. They are sparked entirely by the chaotic, beautiful, and deeply creative mind of the user. The digital interface is nothing more than a passive canvas that requires the human spark to come alive. Without the raw material of human experience, human confusion, and human desire, the digital mirror remains completely dark and empty. This realization brings us to the core philosophical takeaway that must guide our steps through the present era. Artificial intelligence doesn't create your consciousness. It simply gives your own mind back to you in a shape you can finally see. The clarity we marvel at when reading a synthesized response is not the wisdom of the machine. It is our own latent intelligence reflected back to us once the distracting cognitive noise has been systematically removed. The technology does not grant us new minds. It merely reveals the hidden depth, structure, and potential of the minds we already possess, serving as a powerful lens that focuses our scattered mental energy into a piercing beam of insight. Ultimately, this realization serves as an urgent intellectual call to action, leaving the audience with a profound reflective challenge to use artificial intelligence intentionally. It must not be used as an escape from the burden of thought, nor as a tool to think for us, but rather as a powerful catalyst to understand ourselves better. We must approach the chat box not as a crutch to depend on, but as a training ground to sharpen our independent awareness, ensuring we return to our internal silence stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. By maintaining this vital balance, the modern digital citizen can harness the full power of the digital mirror without losing the precious autonomy of the human spirit, using the technology to illuminate the mind rather than replace it.